Welcome back to Girl of Recaps. Today I am going to explain an adventure, comedy, crime movie from 1994 titled Baby's Day Out. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. Bennington Austin Cotwell IV, more commonly referred to as Bink, is the offspring of Lorraine and Bennington Austin Cotwell III, a pair of socialites who reside in a mansion in a suburb of Chicago. The individual who spends the most time with him and genuinely understands him, however, is his caregiver Jill Bertini, a very attentive woman who is willing to read him his favorite book, Baby's Day Out, or as Bink calls it, Boo Boo, repeatedly even if she's exhausted by it. Today, Bink is having his portrait taken so he can feature in the society pages of a newspaper, as Lorraine has been feeling that they've kept their child concealed from their acquaintances. While the mother and nanny prepare the baby, the photographers are ready to go as well, but they encounter a problem when a trio of criminals ambush them. Eddie, Vico, and Norby seize the real photographers, bind them, and leave them in an old deserted warehouse before taking their uniforms and their van so that they can impersonate them. When they arrive at the mansion, their act is accepted without issues, so they take out their equipment as if they were going to take the picture for real and ask the mother for some time alone with the child, because if she's there, she may distract him. Lorraine looks a bit doubtful, but Eddie gets her to leave when he points out her attire is not suitable for the photograph. The servants leave with her to help her find the right dress, but before doing so, Jill Bertini gives Eddie the book in case Bink becomes difficult. With everyone gone, it's incredibly easy for the criminals to abduct the baby and escape through the window, where their van has already been parked. They switch vehicles midway, leaving their disguises with the photographers' uniforms and equipment behind in exchange for their own van. Lorraine finds a note left behind telling her not to contact the police, and Bennington returns from work after receiving a note asking for money as well. The cops and the FBI soon arrive at the house and start their investigation, stopping Lorraine just in time from going out there and searching for the baby on her own, which could be risky. Meanwhile, the criminals are in their concealed hideout, the top-floor apartment of a tall building with a large clock on the front. After changing Bink into less ostentatious clothes so nobody can tell he's a wealthy baby, Norby takes him to the bedroom and reads the book to him, attempting to make him take a nap, but he is the one who falls asleep instead. Bink examines the book on his own and notices there are birds outside the window just like the ones in the story, so he crawls out and uses the fire escape to climb to the roof after the birds. When he finds a skylight, he looks through it and sees Eddie and Vico in the room, capturing their attention when he spits on them and giggles. The criminals panic and chase after him, only to find him crawling on a wooden plank to reach the other roof, where the bird has flown to. Eddie moves closer to grab him and ends up being struck by the plank when the shift of Bink's weight causes it to move up and down. Seeing it as hazardous, Vico tosses the plank away after Bink makes it to the other side, removing the possibility for them to follow him through the same route. The trio decides that the roofs are sufficiently close to each other to leap. Norby and Vico manage to cross over, but Eddie is still disoriented and lands on an alley dumpster. Meanwhile, Bink makes his way into the building, reaching an apartment and managing to exit when the owner opens the door to the mail carrier. They're too preoccupied with each other to notice him crawling around their feet until he reaches the elevator, which he rides to the ground floor before finally exiting the building. Norby and Vico rescue Eddie from the dumpster just in time to see Bink board a crowded blue bus because it resembles the one in the book. They quickly rush to their van and follow him around town. The bus driver notices them and drives away, evading them for a few blocks until the trio manages to find their way back onto the main street, stopping the van right in front of the bus when it halts to let a large woman out, who carries a bag that Bink has crawled into. Norby speaks to the driver and inquires about the baby, but the driver simply drives off. While he contacts the main office to check for any reports of a missing baby, the trio observes the large woman walking behind their van and notices Bink comfortably seated in her bag. They begin tailing her, trying to devise a plan to take Bink without her realizing, but she does notice them and proceeds to drop her belongings in order to confront them. Frightened by her strength, the criminals flee while Bink seizes the opportunity to crawl out of the bag and enter a department store. There, he is discovered by the employee responsible for the mall's daycare, who assumes Bink has escaped her care. She takes him with her and leaves him with the other children after changing his diaper, but Bink escapes again by climbing into another baby's stroller when the mother comes to collect her. After drinking all the juice from the other baby's bottle, Bink waits for the stroller to stop and climbs back out, making his way to the doors and waiting for an adult to open them so he can go outside. On the streets, a reporter is already covering his abduction on the news, and he crawls past her when he spots a taxi, which also reminds him of his book. He causes the reporter to drop her microphone, and the cameras are briefly on him, giving the criminals a chance to see him on a shop's television. They rush after him, but don't make it in time. Bink crawls into the taxi and looks at them through the window as the car drives away. In the meantime, the Cotwells receive a call from a man claiming to have seen the baby and go to investigate. The man points out an apartment after receiving some money from them, but it was, of course, a deception. It's a random baby belonging to a perfectly decent woman. When the taxi stops to drop off its passengers, Bink crawls out and spots the zoo across the street, which is also featured in his book. The criminals arrive then, having followed the taxi with their van, and see him cross the street without any issues. They attempt to do the same, but it's more challenging for 3 grown men to be unnoticed by the vehicles, so a car ends up running over their toes, causing them to flee in pain and tumble into a ditch. After they get out, they enter the zoo and follow Bink's tracks in the dirt that lead them to the ape house, where Bink is happily sitting inside a cage with a gorilla. This gorilla likes the baby and treats him as if he were its own, feeding him fruits and keeping him secure. It isn't as pleasant, however, when Vico puts his arm inside the cage to try to grab Bink. The gorilla just observes him for a few seconds before moving closer and smashing his hand with its fist. Their next plan is to use a mop they find nearby. Norby inserts its handle inside the cage and attempts to maneuver it through Bink's clothes to lift him up, but the gorilla quickly notices and retrieves Bink before striking Norby with the mop. Afterward, they wait for the ape to fall asleep, and now it's Eddie's turn to try to get the baby out. At first, it seems he's successfully bringing Bink closer, but the gorilla wakes up, seizes Eddie, and angrily throws him against another cage after roaring in his face. At that moment, the zoo opens the back of the gorilla's cage, so it can be in the outer area for a while, giving Bink the chance to safely escape. While the Cotwells find Bink's picture in the newspaper, but not in the way they hoped, Bink spends time in the park, observing all the other children play and have fun. He starts crawling away again when the criminals arrive in their van and begin pursuing him, almost catching him before he goes through some bushes and a tunnel that 3 grown men can't enter. The trio rushes to the other side of the park and waits for him to emerge from the tunnel at the other end, seizing him right before the police arrive. Playing the innocent bystander role, they sit on a nearby bench and conceal Bink between Eddie's legs, covering him with his jacket. The officers start asking questions about their van and a missing baby, and Eddie tries his best to respond while squirming in discomfort because Bink is hitting his groin and even setting it on fire after he finds a lighter in one of Eddie's pockets. Norby and Vico take the officers away with them to show them something about the van, while Bink leaves the lighter on the bench and climbs down from Eddie's lap, who cannot stop him from escaping due to the intense pain. When his 2 friends return, they throw him to the ground and extinguish the fire by stomping repeatedly on his groin. Back in the house, Lorraine approaches Gilbertini, realizing she's the only one who can relate to how she feels. While they bond over their affection for the baby, Bink is making his way to a construction site, closely followed by Vico. Bink spots a worker's donut and wants it for himself, so he climbs onto a steel beam to reach it, not minding that he's now being elevated with the beam to the highest floor of the building. Eddie and Norby join Vico then, and together the 3 of them take the elevator until they reach an area the beam hasn't reached yet. The concept is to leap onto it and retrieve the baby when the beam eventually reaches their level, but the scheme doesn't work out well. When Vico leaps onto the beam, his weight causes it to tilt downward and Bink to slide off until he lands on the elevator roof. As he scrambles inside the building, Eddie and Norby attempt to assist Vico, who's about to lose his hold on the beam. Norby tries to grasp him to pull him back inside, but he slips and ends up hanging from the beam with him for a moment before he loses his hold and falls onto some wooden planks. This motion is enough to give the steel beam a nudge, and Vico manages to leap back into the building, landing on top of Eddie. Norby isn't as fortunate, though. He slips off the wood only to land on another steel beam before falling again and landing in a vat of wet concrete. Eddie and Vico attempt to trail Bink while evading the workers, but Vico fares as poorly as Norby. He tries to leap back onto the elevator but bumps his head a few times, and in his disorientation, he ends up falling off the building and landing in a dumpster. The responsibility now falls to Eddie. He comes perilously close to Bink and is about to capture him, but he slips on some saliva the baby has dropped, causing him to tumble and strike his head with a mallet. When he tries to rise, he clings to a dangling rope for support, but pulling it turns out to be a blunder when it upends a vat that douses Eddie with adhesive. This slows his progress since he can barely take a step without sliding, and it gives Bink enough time to wriggle away and board a moving platform that takes him back down. In desperation, Eddie notices the moving hook of a crane and leaps onto it, assuming it will also be lowered to the ground. However, at that moment, the workers conclude their shift and leave the site, leaving Eddie stranded on the crane watching the sunset. One of the workers spots Bink crawling out of the construction site, but the idea seems so absurd that he attributes it to his imagination. The criminals abandon their pursuit of the baby and decide to head home. The FBI visits the Cotwells to update them on all the locations where Bink has been spotted throughout the day. Gilbertini quickly pieces it together and realizes he's tracking the path of the book, so the final place Bink will visit must be the old soldier's residence. The family and the officers drive there and indeed find him among the seniors, who are singing a song for him. Once the family is reunited, they all get back in the car with the FBI agents, and as they drive along the highway, Bink recognizes the building where he was held because of the clock outside. He starts pointing at it and calling it Boo Boo, which signals to the adults that his book is there. The FBI turns around and, after calling for backup, surrounds the building and demands the criminals to surrender and return the book. Eddie has no choice but to throw the book at them through the window before he and his companions raise their hands, waiting to be arrested. When the family returns home, they follow the conclusion of the book, which involves putting the baby to bed. Once his parents are out of view, Bink heads to his shelves and picks out his next favorite, Baby's Journey to China.